Tonight we're going to wrap up the spring 2015 grade series with Dr.PAT Bew. Those of you who don't know Pat, he is the Senior Director in the Student Affairs Department, relatively new to Chadron State College. Dr. Bew has a bachelor's degree in elementary education. He has a master's degree in counseling and guidance and an EDD in adult, community, and higher education. So obviously he has a wealth of knowledge to bring to us. Tonight he's going to talk a little bit about changes in higher education. The title of his talk is Preparing Today's Kids for Tomorrow's College, Thoughts on Academic and Social Changes. So please join me in welcoming Pat.
I really want you to know how much I appreciate the opportunity of being with you. This is one of those kind of experiences that you know, you think about. Well, first of all, Sean's extremely persuasive, and so it's kind of hard to turn her down. But it's one of those kind of things. I enjoy the opportunity to bounce ideas off of folks, and this is really more than a presentation or anything like that. It's an idea kind of concept. It's an opportunity for us to get some perspectives. I've got some YouTube videos we want to watch, and certainly discuss the possibility as it relates to higher education and what the future of that implies. Because Sean was very good at saying, look, this is the amount of time you have. You can go over, but this is the amount of time you have. But that's okay if you want to go over, but this is the amount of time you have. I've tried to put some of my words down on paper, so I'm going to kind of script it for a little bit. But obviously there'll be times when we'll just kind of move off, and then someone will have to say, but you need to get back on task. But anyway, as Sean indicated, I'm Pat Bew, and I'm the Senior Director of Student Affairs on campus, and I'm really, really grateful to be here at Chadron State College. This has been a wonderful year for me, from a learning and personal growth experience. Though I have to admit, when I came from the School of Mines in Rapid City, engineering school, all that kind of thing, I came from a very academic background and academic experiences. I thought I had a pretty good handle on helping students be successful. And then I came here. And I'm not foreign to liberal arts institutions. I was at Peru State College for a number of years, and before that I was at a small Catholic school up in Montana. And as Sean indicated, I've got a degree in elementary education, and so I'm certainly familiar with liberal arts institutions. But coming back and helping students be successful has been a real learning experience for me this past year. And I'm very grateful for that experience. I've had the opportunity of rubbing shoulders with Jake Rissler, who's been our Board of Trustees representative. It's been great working with him on CAB and Student Senate. I've really appreciated being with Susan Hines. I'd have known it, but I'm in this, you know, I've got to give it, you know, that kind of thing. Susan Hines, who helped us put some things down here for our TRIO program to be able to help serve students and help them be successful. And of course, I've really loved working with Sean and Francis Gonzalez, who's working here in the library. There we go. I better turn that off. This presentation is less based on specific research on this particular topic and more on my role as an educator and parent. And if I say parent, then I need to tell you that I couldn't have done it by myself. And I'm very grateful this evening to have my wife here. And it's okay to point fingers at Gail Bew back there in the corner. She has been not only one who's helped me in terms of all of my roles and responsibilities professionally, but also as a father, but she's been an educator herself and has spent a great number of years working with special needs children in the Rapid City School District. And so obviously if I come across with a particular slant, I'm going to be influenced somewhat by her. But anyway, I appreciate her, and I appreciate the fact that she would be here tonight. I've been in higher education for 30 years. That seems like a long time, but it goes by very quickly. But in that time, Gail and I have enjoyed having 4 kids. And what prompted this particular talk has a lot to do with my efforts and Gail's efforts in preparing kids for college. Now, I have one child who is right now full-time in college, and she is here at Chadron State. And this has been a very interesting and educational experience for us because her oldest sister, the first child, is 10 years older than she is. Her educational experience wasn't at all like the last one. And we've had two others working their way through the pipeline, getting their degrees. One's doing it distance ed right now. Another one had taken a break off for a period of time and is getting ready to get back into the saddle for education. But anyway, it's been interesting preparing these kids for college, in part because when that first child was born, it was 1984. I know that seems like a long time for people like Jake, but for the rest of us, for Ed there, Ed's saying, that was just 2 or 3 days ago, I'm sure. I appreciate Ed being here. Ed is 95. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing that. He graduated from Chadron State in 1968. Is that right? 1968. And he was already 60-some years old at the time. So that puts a lot of things in perspective. But anyway, as I thought about this, I was thinking about my own kids and going all the way back to 1984. In 1984, I had just accepted my very first professional experience or position at the College of Great Falls in Great Falls, Montana. It was a small Catholic school. I remember going in, and my first assignment included a desk in which there was no personal computer on it. There was no computers I think the secretary had a computer. I think it was that advanced that she had moved up. And within a year or so, I think I had a computer on my desk. But that kind of set the stage for the difference in the 30 years between that period of time and now. I said, when I finished my master's degree program with Gail, she was my new wife, and she was the secretary for the dean of students. And she would be typing my papers. I'd ask her to type my papers, and she would type it on what was at that point in time a word processor. And what was funny about that is one of my professors disallowed me to submit papers that she typed because he felt that there was a bias, an advantage that I had because she had this access to a word processor and obviously spell check, you know, which was of course cheating, and certainly the capability of some editing skills on that as well. But anyway, I was so frustrated with him that I refused to take another class from him, and so I ended up making a mistake by that stubbornness on my part, because he ended up being on my master's committee, and he didn't let me forget that he was right and I was wrong and all that kind of thing. Anyway, I need to also indicate that in teacher education, I remember the many discussions we had about the degree of allowing, the degree to which we would allow elementary education children in elementary education learn and use a calculator in the class because of its capability of cheating the students, giving them an unfair advantage, things along those lines. And so I remember, of course, back in my own fourth grade experience, learning the multiplication tables and knowing that if I had to memorize what the multiplication tables were, everybody had to memorize those. So anyway, it was certainly a part of that challenge. And it's been my observation that times have really changed. And that's what, of course, prompted much of this. This little presentation is really about change. And it's less on technology, but technology is a part of that change. And so I can't ignore that. It's also somewhat directed to parents. And whether I've got much in the way of parents here or not, it's certainly something that I've been giving a lot of thought about, because much of my responsibility as the Senior Director of Student Affairs has to do with whether kids are prepared for higher education or not. I'll see, of course, about 500 students come this upcoming fall, and they are in various degrees of their developmental process, both personally, socially, academically, and so on and so forth like that. And oftentimes I end up rubbing shoulders with a few of them, and a part of that has a lot to do with their transitioning from a high school experience to a collegiate one. And the jump for some is a real challenge. But with 4 children, Gail and I held tenaciously to the past as we were swept into the future. First with computer technology, then the internet, then with communication, then with learning that we would, never have imagined was going to transpire as far as platforms, learning experiences such as what we're having like right here. In fact, as you can tell, I'm still stuck somewhat in the past. The fact that I'm standing here lecturing you is a part of that paradigm that our kids, or that our children's children, or our grandchildren, Jake's children in particular, you know, if I can pick on him, you know, it's going to be a little different in many respects. We're talking about a variety of ways that that's going to happen. I've had to struggle as I've raised my children through, you know, adjusting to the internet, the responsibility of cell phone technology, the growth of online classes, you know, those kind of things. And so indeed, the future has swept over Gail and I, and we didn't always adjust very well, and we pretty much held pretty tenaciously to the past. However, we've abandoned a landline in our home, and we've adopted handheld internet communications, and we monitor Facebook, and we monitor Twitter and Instagram, and even when we're brave, we'll monitor Yik Yak, because we have to find out what's really happening in the lives of our kids, or the kids that we deal with here. So how do we prepare our children or our grandchildren, especially as it relates to the desires that we have that they get the education necessary to adequately prepare for the future of tomorrow? The research shows that college freshmen are preparing for employment upon graduation that they oftentimes cannot see. There are things happening that are reflective of that. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to start off with just kind of a video clip of the future of education. There's going to be a particular slant. There's going to be a particular bias in this. I don't buy into all the biases associated with it, but I think it's valuable and helpful for us to think for a moment, what is education going to look like as we, you know, project into the future, 15 years or 10 years even, and things along those lines. And so perhaps to start us off and give us an idea of the discussion, I want us to watch this video. Well, thoughts, impressions. I've watched that now, of course, a number of times, and it reminds me of Rod Sterling in The Twilight Zone a little bit, on a number of levels. Not only does it sound a little bit that way, you know, with that background music and, of course, all of that kind of thing, but it's especially if you're in higher education. And I need to tell you that I have a bias. I was raised up through the system. You know, I struggle with my own forms of technology issues and all of those kind of things. I'm a real firm believer that, you know, the teacher is the master of his or her classroom and all of that kind of thing. But it certainly poses some interesting thoughts. What are a couple of the takeaways that you might have? Now, like a good teacher, I love picking on the audience. So let me start with Christine.
I think that's possible. That could happen, but that time frame is ludicrous.
That's an interesting thing. You know, you're talking about, you know, in 5 years. And,
yeah.
Good point. Good point. Francis, you and I have talked a number of times about these issues. What's your thought as you heard that?
Scares me.
Why does that scare you?
Well, that's, you know, as we've talked many times about our students really getting the education that they should.
I'm sorry, what?
In that format. Are they really getting the education? That's the question.
And I think, you know, it doesn't take very long for us to begin to ask the questions. What are the implications that has to laboratories? or to hands-on experiences, and all that may be all fine and dandy for things that you can get knowledge-wise, lecture-wise, and things like that, but how about, you know, hands-on type learning, laboratory type of experiences and things along those lines? Is that what kind of you mean? Good, good. What do you think, Tina Cook? You've been around higher education a couple of years.
I think it's an interesting concept, the badges, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, good. Yeah, interesting. Ed, you've been around a few years. Any thoughts as we reflect on that?
I don't think I don't hear too well. I didn't get the whole question. What's the question?
The question is did you have any observations or reflections after having watched that? Any thoughts? Were you able to hear that okay, or was that difficult to hear?
No, I could hear that. It just talked about a general way of teaching.
Yeah.
One thing, in the military, see, I was in the military for 20 years before I came back to college. And they told you don't want those soldiers down there sleeping. You're training them. You better have them listening. And one weapon I used quite a bit was throw a little humor into it.
There you go.
And that helped a lot.
You know, you bring up a great point. Now, how many of you have taken online class or distance education? Yeah. What was your observation taking that class? What do you think, Sean?
Well, my first experience with online was at Texas Women's University, and it was all new to me. And it was difficult for me because I was used to the face-to-face interaction. And your emails could be misconstrued, misinterpreted by your professor. You know, it's different because I don't see your body language, and so it was hard for me. But you know, that was some time ago too. So
maybe it's improved. Yes, Gail.
I don't know if I missed part of it, but it seems to me from these programs that they're going on that they're just zeroing in on one particular field or area that student will be studying. But the well-rounded education makes a well-rounded person, and I think that agreeing with you is that not only do we need the labs, the interaction as a class, because I think in discussion sometimes things will come up that might not necessarily come up through typing and just reading someone's comments. It's in the discussion that we broaden our horizons to be able to understand other things. And having other courses like in art or music or your English lit, whatever, I think that it makes a well-rounded person in any career field than just to have that narrow vision of their particular area that they're going to work in. That just kind of locks them into a particular box, and they don't have what might help around in the well-roundedness.
Okay, great. Do we know? And a couple of your comments beg the question: do we know any little children who are learning? Who are learning knowledge anyway, just based on a handheld device, without the classroom experience and all of that kind of thing. Jake, you're as young as anybody in here, with the exception of Francis, perhaps. But what's your thoughts on what they're talking about there and your learning experience, and as you look into the future?
That video honestly kind of scares me because it would mean what I've done over the past 4 years. My degree would mean nothing if that happens. And I mean, not nothing, but the piece of paper that I learned for that's going to help me advance with my career all of a sudden is replaced with an online learning platform and badges, which would mean I've got to start over and prove myself through that aspect. Now that part scares me, even that the entire educational system that has been developed over since the founding of our nation is just gone. We start with a whole new foundation, a whole new system that goes back to what you're saying is it direct focused? Is there still general study requirements? The social aspect always scares me too because I'm not one of the most traditional everyday students. I don't match the mold pretty much. I don't even like online classes. That's just my thing. I don't learn as much. I don't get as much out of it from an online course as if I'm interacting with a professor or other students in a face-to-face kind of manner. And one example right now is the production and operations management class that I'm in. The mathematics of that I can't understand unless I have a professor walk me through step by step. I've always struggled with math and I always will. But if I'm looking at that I can't have that unless I have a walkthrough. Maybe you could develop a video that would walk me through that, which there are videos for that, but I don't really see how that could directly relate.
Hold that thought. We'll come back to that. Susan, I've been waiting for your observations.
What you said, Gail, I sometimes wonder that this is kind of dark to me too. And I'll show you my inner socialist. I feel like that companies like Amazon and Google, all of these companies that are building schools to train their minions, you're creating workers for companies. You're not creating citizens for our country who are free thinkers and are more than just their jobs. I feel like getting an education that everybody wants to get a good job based upon their education, but I feel like an education should build great citizens. And I don't know that it's doing that. I really don't.
But to go back to what you're saying is it should challenge you, because there's classes here that challenge my beliefs and my belief system. That's good. I don't see that happening. You select a course and you say, all right, I want to do this. If I'm going to focus just on business, I'm not going to take all the gen eds. Yeah, you hear kids all the time say, I don't want to take gen eds. There's a reason why we take gen eds. It took me 4 years to realize that. But
it's if you notice in the video, they bought Udacity, they bought Khan Academy, they bought all the STEM, all the sciencey stuff, and what they're, to become the purveyors of what education is, because if you want a job, you're going to want this. I just feel like I actually see us moving more in that direction because Americans don't want to pay taxes. They don't want to support their education infrastructure. They want to turn it over to a business venture, and businesses are these big, colossal, they want to make profits at the expense of everything. It's the nature of business, and I just feel like, is that really how we want to educate people?
I appreciate you bringing that up, Susan, in part because what I'm hearing, and I think that this is fairly accurate, there are two issues going on in here. First of all, where our heart lies. And I think our heart does lie in this model that says, hey, I want the interaction, I want the traditional, and so on and so forth like that. The concern lies in the unknown and in the future. And as I've been preparing this, and as I've been thinking a lot about this over the last couple of months, my thought has taken me back many times to other transitional times in history. And in my mind, probably the best example I can think of is around the 1880s to the early 1900s. In the world, as we transitioned out of this horse transportation to a mechanized age, and how big business, Standard Oil of America, how we were, of course, a part of that. I was watching an NPR or PBS special the other day, not too long ago, about Thomas Edison, and how in America at that particular point in time in the 1880s, there was tremendous effort, of course, to invent, and that was a part of the culture. And one of the concerns I hear a little bit from us, and that we hear, in that particular perspective, is that somehow, whether our heart's into it or not, we have a society or a culture that is transitioning more and more that way. Now, what are the implications? I don't think I'm going to focus nearly as much on, our role as parents for the sake of this discussion tonight, but what are the implications does that have if you're a parent of children, or going to be a parent of children, and preparing them for the future? Do you teach them, as Gail and I did, boy, this is how you manage your time effectively. This is how you prepare for tests, and this is how you do homework with a textbook and things like that? Or do you prepare them for a more technology-focused learning environment, one that I think that, at least as you watch that particular video, you say, whether it's 5 years from now or 15 years from now, our kids are still going to be working through that pipeline. And I guess I would ask you to think for a moment about the transition you've had to make, like Gail and I have had to make in our lives as it relates to technology, and how we can reflect back not long ago when we didn't have a PC in our home. And then when we got rid of the PC in our home, and then we got a handheld device, and so on and so forth like that. So I want you to think about where our heart is, the traditional kind of thing, and the pressures that are going to be not just placed on us as individuals or as families or as a society, but especially in higher education. When push comes to shove and the resources have to be placed, where is the state of Nebraska going to put its money as it relates to the future? And what are we seeing now? What are some of the evidences associated with that? For example, adjunct faculty. How many credits are being offered on this particular campus that are distance learning credits and not classroom focused and that kind of thing? If we were to try to bring out the glass ball and take a look 10 years into the future, what would we see Chadron State College looking like 10 years from now? You know, those kind of things. So let me reflect, share this with you. Right now, there are three major trends in higher education. One is the perceived value of a college degree to the impact of the internet on program offerings and the nature of the college experience, whether it's residential or online, that kind of thing. This is from Ryan, let's see, Ryan. Oh, Dr. Kevin Manning, writing for Time Magazine, Contemporary Challenges Facing American Higher Education. He says, the federal government has always been at the forefront of financial support to students attending colleges. Now, for myriad reasons, this support is being questioned. One reason is the record amount of money debt incurred by students seeking a degree, coupled with the national economic challenges that impact employability. This issue has brought a spotlight on the financial and recruitment activities of for-profit institutions in recent years, but for independent nonprofit universities, it's also important. He says, you add to this concern at the federal level a growing public perception about the long-term investment value of a college degree. In other words, right now I'm preaching to the choir. You guys all know that a college degree is important, but we live in a society that there are a number of voices that are saying, wait, I'm not altogether too sure the diploma is all that valuable, and maybe just the skill set, you know, that kind of thing. He says, this is a trend that poses a serious public relations challenge for higher education, and in the eyes of many families, long gone are the days when a college degree was perceived as a cornerstone achievement that guaranteed a degree recipient a place in the job market. Now, you and I would say, well, it's still valuable, but again, you know, there's a lot of voices that would suggest otherwise. There are solutions to that particular problem, and a more robust notion of career preparation during a student's college years is a key, I find that interesting, to restoring American families' confidence in higher education. But institutions must first acknowledge that the job market is vastly different than decades ago, and with that, the very notion of what career preparation is and how it must change. How do we build a model that brings career preparation and education together meaningfully for students and families sacrificing to achieve a college degree? So this whole issue associated with the money associated with financing higher education, of course, I always find it interesting, you know, and of course nothing annoys me more than turning on the news and watching, you know, them interview some poor psych student. I can say that I was an ed psych student. Some poor psych student who's, a barista at Starbucks or something like that, and how she can't get a job. My response generally to that is that's hardly the problem of higher education. And yet, the society is reflecting on that and saying that's a problem of higher education. So I think it's valuable to note from that perspective. Let me have you just watch one more. I have to admit, I'm not altogether too sure I grasped the significance of what he was saying about doctrine, but I found a number of interesting points in what he was talking about, especially in what the kids of the future are going to need, you know, in terms of reading comprehension. I was just talking with Francis about that today, you know, reading comprehension, the ability to know how to research something, to look up something, to find knowledge. And of course, that's changed dramatically in the last few years, of course, with the internet and access to it. But I thought that was interesting too, what he had to say about believe, which is having faith in discovery, in innovation, in finding out what you're trying to do, you know, those kind of things. Any thoughts, any observations based on what you saw there? Or what do you think? Was it just like the first one, or some same folks? What do you think, Sean?
I'm still thinking.
What do you think, Amy?
Learning has to be exciting.
Pardon?
Learning has to be exciting. We have to engage students and make them excited about what they want to do. And if it's not exciting, if it's just an online course, that you're at the computer by yourself, you know, trying to teach yourself something, and no interaction, no ability to talk it over, ask people, it's not learning.
But you know what the cynic would say? The cynic could say, you know, we've got face-to-face classes right now that aren't exciting.
But they're not engaging.
Well, and that begs the question, how do we blend both the traditional with the futuristic? And the futuristic, I really believe, is going to be very student-centered. I share some of the concerns that Susan was talking about in terms of, you know, being based, you know, through some corporation or, you know, some entity, you know, that's going to be calling those shots. But I'd like to believe, at least as I look to the future and as I think about my children or grandchildren looking to the future, student-centered learning, where they're calling the shots in many, having some structure associated with it, of course, but where they get to do some of the learning. And I thought I saw a little bit of that in there. So I don't disagree, but the cynic is going to say, yeah, but if you're going to base it only on what happens if you're, you know, getting it from a professor standing up in front of you, you run that risk of it not being engaging there as well. So beware, you know.
I'm not necessarily saying the professor, I'm saying the students.
Right.
Among students.
Exactly.
That needs to be there.
Exactly.
But we also have a problem with students feeling like they've got to be entertained all the time also. The thing that I dealt with is I found that kids, because of the computer games they were playing at middle school and high school, dulled their imagination. When they were given a topic in English, or not a topic, but they were given the assignment to write a story, they sat there and just stared because they couldn't come up with something because they had to create it. And they're used to all of these games and programs being created for them. And so we have an imbalance here as to what's really happening. You know, we've got parents who say, no, you're pushing my kid too hard. They can't do that. They shouldn't have to read a chapter a day, you know, in their books and yada, yada, yada. And then we have, on the other hand, the parents complaining because they don't get the kids engaged and excited about learning. You know, so we've got a big problem here of finding a balance to be able to engage them, yet push them, and yet still at the same time have them do a little bit more of their own thinking.
My mother used to have this expression. It was, because I grew up in a family of 4 kids, and we would like schlep around the house and say, God, I'm so bored. And if she ever heard that, she'd like pull your ear or swat you on the head and say, bored people are boring. And the truth is that she's right. We all learn how to pick up books, create hobbies, engage. We didn't have to, I mean, I think high-level engagement was a kid reading a book. And I'd love to see more of it around the library, but usually they're on a computer screen, and I don't always know what they're doing. But I don't think an instructor has to engage you. In fact, what we're seeing in the videos are get out of the room, set up a scenario where they can teach each other and can self-engage. And I feel like a lot to be said about that. I mean, you take somebody who's naturally curious and then force them to sit in a room and be disengaged with somebody who really isn't engaging them if they're learning a negative. They're learning about how not to learn.
One of the things that I thought was insightful was the kid reflecting on collaboration. And I think he was reflecting on that among students in the class, working together and things like that. Without question, you and I will see the day when it won't be uncommon for even high school or even middle school kids, maybe even at the elementary school, to collaborate with children on the other side of the planet. Without question, you know, and I would hardly want to leave you with the message that this is to diss technology or to diss the system or the current system, all that kind of thing. I just want us to, and I'm going to leave you on this thought. I thought it was insightful what he said. You know, if you go back 100 or 200 years ago, a skill that was being considered valuable for a life sustaining, shooting a gun, riding a horse, in our day, of course, is now, you know, a recreational activity, shooting a gun or riding a horse. You know, I find that to be instructive to me. Why? Because what are we doing today? It's kind of like what he was saying. Do you think we'll see the day when doing math is kind of a recreational activity? Why? Because you can pull out your cell phone and do it there, you know, if you have to. And we're at that stage now. I mean, I don't need to know my times tables. I just pull out my cell phone and I can, you know, do that. Well, you know, the cynic in me would say, wait a minute, Pat. You know, you need to know. That's a basic skill. You need to know that. Jake, you know, at 20 some odd years old, he may say, well, thank you for that observation, Pat, but I'm not altogether too sure I need to memorize the timetables now. And if you take our children or our grandchildren, I think that that is a real question that we need to kind of pose to ourselves in reference to them. Things that we find are especially valuable and important for life sustaining, knowing times tables. Boy, I don't know that 20 years from now, it'll have that same impact. I've run out of time, but I want you to know how much I've appreciated being able to kind of bounce these ideas off of you. I hope it's kind of spurred you to think a little bit. Certainly, if not for you, certainly for our field of education, and certainly as it pertains to, you know, trying to map the trajectory. If I were, and I appreciate what Susan does, you know, she has contributed to a revitalization, I think, of the Library Learning Center here. We're holding on tenaciously, I think, to a building that would say, hey, we need to keep this. We need to keep this environment for the learning experience, and at the same time deal with the fact that we've got a heating and air conditioning system that needs to be replaced, and will need to be replaced, and will cost so many thousand, how many $1,000?
It's in the millions.
Okay, thank you.
It's cost prohibitive.
It's a lot of money. And yet, if I tell you, boy, there's a lot of things we can learn just by having that silly computer or handheld device, you know. But anyway, I hope it's provided you some thoughts. Thanks so very much for being with us.